Hi, my name's Sheehan, and today I'd like to talk about A Study in Scarlet, the novel by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, which of course is the first story with Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson in. I'd just like to go through the structure of this book as well as the themes that crop up in it. Now, this was published in 1887 in a magazine, Beaton's Christmas Annual, it was called. But then the following year it was published in its own right, and of course the rest is history. Although Conan Doyle wrote 3 more full-length novels about Holmes and Watson, of course he also wrote the extraordinarily famous and influential short stories as well, collections of short stories. So A Study in Scarlet really marks the beginning of a phenomenon, which of course in turn has inspired countless films and TV shows, etc. And I suppose the essence of A Study in Scarlet, seen purely from the point of view of its plot, is really about 2 murders perpetrated in vengeance. Now the novel is in 2 parts, consisting of 7 chapters each, and part 1 really is concerned with these 2 strange murders which are baffling Scotland Yard. But at the end of this section the killer is actually apprehended, and part 2 really goes into more depth about the murderer's motivations, etc. And we begin with this amazing chapter where Dr. John Watson, this doctor who worked in the army overseas in Afghanistan, comes back after being injured himself and settles down to life in Victorian London, but he's looking for lodgings. He hasn't got a lot of money, and he's looking to share the costs of rent with someone else. And his friend Stamford introduces him to Sherlock Holmes. So A Study in Scarlet is worth reading just for the first chapter, really, the first few chapters where Watson and Holmes get to know each other. It really is very beautiful. Holmes is immediately portrayed as this eccentric, cold yet brilliant man. Such an unforgettable character. It's easy for me to say that, of course, 130 years later, you know, the benefit of hindsight, etc. But Holmes really is a fascinating character from the opening of this novel. The sheer brilliance of his mind, his precise analytical skill, his ability to read clues which are completely unnoticed by others, which of course is seen most apparently in his opening chapters in the way Holmes describes people's backgrounds and professions to an incredulous Watson by simply viewing them for a few seconds out of his window or whatever. You can really see how Conan Doyle has come up with such an amazing character here. And then indeed not just Holmes but of course Watson as well, a great double act. But then Holmes gradually allows Watson into his world of investigating crime, and they go to this murder scene in an abandoned house, and a police constable gives Holmes a witness statement, and then a mysterious old lady comes to retrieve this ring which was left at the scene of the crime. And then Detective Gregson comes on the scene. He works for the Metropolitan Police, and he thinks he's got it wrapped up, but then another detective, Lestrade, comes on board, who we see countless other times throughout the short stories, of course, and he reveals that another murder's been committed. But then, somewhat miraculously, the murderer, this man called Jefferson Hope, all of a sudden is apprehended in Holmes's living room. So what are we to make of all this? Well, part 2 helps us with that because it fleshes out much more detail about the motivations behind Jefferson Hope. And part 2 is largely concerned with the Mormons, believe it or not. The Mormons are a fledgling kind of splinter Christian group in 19th century America, and they're making their way to Utah, of course, and that's the kind of backdrop of this story. And we're introduced to a man called John Ferrier and this girl called Lucy. They seem to be in a difficult situation. They're kind of in the desert, they haven't got any food or shelter. Looks like they're running away from something or someone. And they're rescued by the Mormons. And then Jefferson Hope, who Holmes thinks has murdered these people in London, he comes onto the scene as this kind of outsider to the Mormon community, and he falls in love with this girl Lucy. But the Mormon elders kind of turn against John, this older guy, and Lucy, his charge. They don't think that they're really committed to the Mormon faith, and so they start kind of piling the pressure on them, and they want Lucy to marry one or two of the elders. And so John and Lucy escape with the help of Jefferson Hope, and they go into the wilderness. But then tragically, the elders catch up with them while Jefferson's out hunting, and they murder John Ferrier, and they abduct Lucy to be taken back and to be forced into marriage. And Jefferson now is just consumed with the desire to wreak vengeance on these elders, these Mormon elders. And the two elders in question were called Drebber and Stangerson, and Hope tracks them down across the world, ending up in Europe, ending up in London, and it's there that he perpetrates the two murders. Hope himself is on trial for murder, but he's at peace with himself now because he's finally got his vengeance on his beloved Lucy. But he is ill and he dies of an aortic aneurysm. And it's at the end of the novel that Holmes explains to Watson how he works this out so cleverly and so quickly during part 1. And that's when this novel ends. Now, some of the themes, of course, are omnipresent in all Sherlock Holmes stories, and indeed all detective fiction. The idea of clues hidden in plain sight, of murder, of vengeance, of love, of forced marriage, actually, which turns up in other Holmes stories as well. But perhaps what's the most surprising theme from a 21st century point of view, I guess, is Mormonism. But that must have been quite a big thing at the time, I guess, in terms of being a new Protestant Christian group at the time. I think Conan Doyle got a bit of flack about his treatment of the Mormons in subsequent years, but it's quite an interesting angle in this novel, having this whole backdrop of the Mormons migrating across America. And it's quite un-Sherlock Holmes-like if you're used to the short stories, like I am, having this vast swathe of text devoted to this situation where Holmes and Watson are entirely absent. It's well written and pacey nonetheless. You don't get bored during this story. So whether you're familiar with Holmes, Sherlock Holmes through the TV adaptations or the films, or indeed the short stories, but A Study in Scarlet has passed you by somehow, please check it out. It really is a very entertaining read. and really such a momentous read as well, in a rather unassuming way, because this of course starts off the whole thing. Thank you for watching. Bye.